Professor Badri, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
My full name is Malik Badri. Babikir Badri, my father, was the man who established the first girls' education in Sudan in the year 1907. When I was born in this little town known as Rufa'a in the Sudan, my father was 71 years old. I continued studying my primary and secondary education in our private school that was established by my father. Then I went to the American University of Beirut, where I first wanted to study pharmacy. Then I didn't really like the courses. Then I moved to physics. Then I moved to biology. And lastly, I ended up in studying psychology and education. I then did my master's in the same university. I did my PhD in Leicester University in England in 1961. And I did my postgraduate training in behavior therapy in the Middlesex Hospital in 1966. This, in brief, is my academic qualifications. I have been, Allah granted me the possibility to teach in different places. I taught in the University of Jordan. I taught in the American University of Beirut. I taught in Riyadh University before it became King Saud University. I taught in Imam Muhammad bin Saud University, and I taught in Durman Islamic University. I was with UNESCO in Ethiopia. I just went around and I ended up in Malaysia in the International Islamic University, where I taught in the Department of Psychology for more than 23 years. Now I have been asked again to come to the university to hold the chair of Ibn Khaldun, where I am now in it. But I am permanently a professor of psychology in our university in Sudan, the Ahfad University for Women. I'm happy to be with Professor Rassool and to see his university, inshallah, develop into a fully fledged Islamic university. Thank you very much.
Professor Badri, how long have you been interested in Islamization of psychology?
Yes, this question will take me back to 1953 and 54, when I was a student in the American University of Beirut. My first course of psychology was, I remember, taught by an American lecturer. And at that time, in 1953, the hero of psychology was Sigmund Freud. And all psychology was more or less based in one way or the other on psychoanalytic theories and practices. And it was quite obvious to me at the time that I came as a Muslim from the Sudan, young Muslim from Sudan, and the whole issue of psychosexual development, the id as being the area of that directs the human behavior in an unconscious manner, all this stuff of Freud that has now been exposed and reconsidered, that was considered like a science at the time. I did not accept this, and I used to argue with my professor. But then, all the time, they would say, okay, if you don't accept this, what is the alternative? There was no alternative at the time. So by the time I finished my education in undergraduate education, I started to think about how can we formulate a form of psychology which is based on our Islamic faith, based on our culture. Here I must say that I'm greatly indebted to two great scholars of the time, scholars who used to do their best to remold Western, useful Western psychological thought in an Islamic fashion. These two people, two great scholars, were Muhammad Qutb, particularly at that time his book Islam, a Misunderstood Religion, which is in Arabic Shubuhat Hawla al-Islam, and the books of Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi. These two people were very important in trying to give me, at that time I was a young student, to give me a self-confidence in Islam as a way of life, and to see the contradictions. Particularly Muhammad Qutb was very good in showing the contradictions of Freudian thought. Now this to me was very important as an undergraduate, but then when I finished my PhD and I came back to teach in the American University of Beirut, it was then that behavior therapy came into existence. It was the very early 60s at the time. So I said I must go and see this new approach in psychology and psychotherapy. And I traveled to London. I met Ising. I wasn't very much impressed by him as a personality, though I was greatly impressed with his books, the early paperbacks that he wrote, Fact and Fiction in Psychology, and Sense and Nonsense in Psychology. These books were very useful in trying to expose the Freudian myth. So I went to Ising. Then Ising told me, I don't train anybody, I only write. Go to Victor Meyer in the Middlesex Hospital. I went there. He was happy to train me in the field, and it was then that I could find an alternative to the garbage that we were forced to study as when we were undergraduates. I think that more or less this is the beginning of my interest in the Islamization of psychology. Thank you very much.
So, Professor Badri, you were interested, Professor Isaac from the Institute of Psychiatry at the Moseley Hospital had a big influence on you, on your development in terms of becoming a cognitive behavior therapist. Are there any other significant persons or academics or clinicians that have an influence in your professional development?
Yes. Yes, brother Professor Rassool. I think Ising influenced me by his writing, not by his actual practice of psychotherapy. The person who really taught me, the person who was very humble, and he did quite a lot of work in this field to train people in behavior therapy, was Victor Meyer. Victor Meyer was a pilot in the Second World War. He was shot down, and then he came all the way from Germany to England and became the famous psychologist and one of the founders of behavior therapy, in fact. I think he was so good in finding ways in using systematic desensitization, in using even aversion therapy at the time. He was very skillful, and of course, he was the man who has invented, come up with this therapeutic technique for the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder, which is based on exposure and response prevention. I was there with him when he treated his very first patient. Now this has become the psychotherapeutic, the best psychotherapeutic technique for treating obsessive compulsive disorder. I do remember the first case of a British professor of pathology who was working very hard in his laboratory. He wanted his work until the evening, and he wanted to finish the work at home. He took his suitcase, his briefcase, together with his microscope and the specimen of dangerous viruses or germs. But when he wanted to get into his car, the sample poured out fell from him, and the germs were all over his seat. So he panicked. He went to wash his hands with detergents, and later on developed a hand washing obsessive compulsive disorder. And he came to the hospital. His hands were already very red with so much washing, and it was Mayer who ventured into a new technique of therapy, which is now become the common form of treatment. I was very influenced by him. Together with him, there was also Rahman, and as a friend, I was influenced by a psychologist who has just now, he retired a few years ago. His name is Meyer. These were the British psychologists who have really influenced my way into behavior therapy, and later on in cognitive behavior therapy.
Professor Badri, you talk about the influence of British psychologists in the 1950s, 60s. Now, were there any other influence? For example, the American psychologists, because they were very much involved in the development of behavior or behaviorism as an approach in psychology.
Yes.
So, were there any other people?
Yes, it's a good question. I think Britain started behavior therapy, and it developed it fast. At the time in which America was still rather influenced with a psychoanalytic approach. In fact, when I was training in the Middlesex, a number of American noted professors came to study under Victor Mayer in England. But of course, if I speak in general, then indeed the man who actually came up with behavior therapy is Wolpe, John Wolpe. Wolpe is an American of South African origin. I was influenced by him, of course, because he is the developer of the whole field. And I was so happy to meet him in the 80s in the university in Philadelphia. I met him there, and we spoke a lot about his work, and he invited me to become a member in his behavior therapy society at the time. I was really not only influenced with his thought, but I was influenced with his humility and with his ability to accept various opinions from different people. I mean, he was open-minded. These are the two main people whom I have been influenced with, who are not British. Wolpe and another American professor who came all the way to study in London, and we became more of friends. His again, I'm sorry, I don't remember his name now, but later on he became a well-known professor in this field of cognitive behavior therapy. That's maybe all what I can say in this field.
Professor Badri, can you remember your first public lecture on psychology from an Islamic perspective?
Yes, brother. I do remember my first lecture, public lecture. It was in 1963. Then I was external professor, at that time assistant professor, in the University of Jordan. I was invited to come to the University of Jordan to help establish a department of psychology. And then I was asked to give a public talk. I gave a public talk on Islam and psychology. At that time, I did not go to London for my behavior therapeutic research and training. So I spoke generally about Islam as an important worldview in changing the study of psychology. I do remember this lecture very well because of the resistance of the psychologists in the department when we came to the question and answer period. How come you speak about Islamic psychology? Psychology is a pure science. In every way, psychology to them is a pure science. Now, Malik, do you speak about Islamic physics and Fasiq chemistry? Why do you speak to us about Islamic psychology or Islam coming into psychology? Islam has nothing to do with psychology whatsoever. Now, this was a lot of arguments, a lot of talk. The people who attended the conference, who were not in the field of psychology, were more understanding than the psychologists who were in the department with me. That was my first lecture. After coming from London in 19, the lecture I was asked to give was in 1968, 69 in the University of, maybe a bit later on 1971, in the University of Riyadh. At that time it was called the University of Riyadh. And the dean of the university is a friend, his name is Abdullah Nafi. He asked me, please Malik, the lecture that you have given in America on Muslim psychologists in the Lizard's Hole, please translate it to Arabic and give it to us here. So I did so. And again, I had this resistance from the psychologists. Particularly, still a number of them, or in fact most of them, were Egyptian lecturers who were trained in psychoanalytic approach. They were very hostile, and one of them, the only one of them who have studied in America, an open-minded professor, he told me, Malik, don't be surprised that these people are angry with your criticism of Freudian psychology and your talk about behavior therapy. Don't be surprised, because if you take away Freud, they don't know what to teach. In fact, they are receiving their salaries from Freud. So don't be surprised that they are angry with you. The issue is that the students were so happy with the lecture, together with people who were... I can't forget these two lectures because they expressed the atmosphere at the time. Alhamdulillah, now when we speak about Islamic psychology, nobody will come to talk to us about, but you know, at that time, people would talk about Soviet psychology because it is influenced by the communists and the Russian, but they will not accept Islamic psychology. It's very strange.
Professor Badri, you mentioned that Muslim psychologists entering the lizard hole. Can you elaborate on it? Can you clarify it for us?
Yes, indeed, brother. This title of my paper, Muslim Psychologists in the Lizard's Hole, became a very popular paper which I gave in Indianapolis in America by an invitation by the Muslim Social Scientists Association. The idea of Muslim psychologists in the lizard's hole come from the famous hadith in which Prophet Muhammad said, "You are going to follow the ways of those who came before you. Even if they get themselves into a lizard's hole, you will follow them." Then the Sahaba asked him, "Who are the people before us? You mean the Christians and the Jews?" Then he said, "Who else? Who else?" So here what I'm actually saying is that Muslim psychologists are simply accepting Western psychology with all its secular, with all its culture-bound aspects, without thinking. Many of them are good Muslims. When they go home, they put on their garments, they say their prayers, and then when they come to the university to teach, then they become Freudians. There is a lot of contradiction in the way they behave, and that is why I have used this idea of that they are actually getting themselves into a lizard's hole. It became popular, this idea of getting into a lizard's hole. And a Saudi economist also wrote something, Muslim economists in the lizard's hole. He used the same technique. One of my best friends is an American counselor, psychologist. His name is John Sullivan. We are still very, very, very good friends. And he was teaching. He was actually working in a hospital in Indianapolis. And he said to me, when I read your paper on the Muslim psychologists in the lizard's hole, I discovered that I was in a lizard's hole. And I decided to change my approach in psychology, and he did change. He left his job in the hospital and became a counselor with the Muslim Students Association in the United States, and later on he started his own career as a Muslim counselor, and he wrote a very good book on Islamic counseling. He's still alive, we are still writing to each other, and he was impressed with this title, Muslim Psychologists in the Lizard's Hole.
Professor Badri, you talked about lizard hole and Muslim psychologists and Freud and psychoanalysis. So what is wrong with psychoanalysis? Why is Freudian principle of therapy not compatible with Islamic belief and practice?
Yes. If this question was asked in the 60s or maybe 70s, then people will find difficulty in saying what is wrong. with psychoanalysis. But now uh, everybody knows what is wrong with psychoanalysis. For us as Muslims, of course, we what is wrong with psychoanalysis is what is wrong with Western psychology in general. That is about the nature of man. Who is man? Is man some animal who evolved from apes and has no soul, has nothing to do, or is he a chosen creature created by Allah who can worship Allah and become higher than angels, or we can go against his fitra, his predisposition, spiritual predisposition, refuse to worship Allah and become worse than animals. Now, the issue in general is that the nature of man is an important cornerstone to decide what kind of psychology one should have. Now, psychoanalysis, unfortunately, not only accept Darwinian thought, but also went so far as to consider that man is driven psychologically mainly with unconscious sexual, mainly sexual, and also aggressive impulses, which will direct him from birth to grave. And everything is that man does, says or does, is explained in this form. A man, even when not only in his consciousness, but even during his dreams. So indeed, I think the whole thing is based on a fallacious conception about man. Now, of course, many Western psychologists have abandoned Freud. In a number of British universities, they are teaching Freud only from the historical point of view, rather than something to be taught in practice and to be applied. A new book that has come up, I think people should really, Muslim psychologists should read this book by, I think, a lady by the name of Thompson. And the book is titled Freud and Cocaine. And the author showed that Freud had some problem in his nose, and he used to sniff cocaine. And that a number of his theories that were mainly sexual in nature were written while he was addicted to cocaine. Of course, a number of his own colleagues have broken away from him in this issue. Read what Jung said about the insistence of Freud in explaining everything in terms of sex and in going against religion. He claims that he is an atheist and that there is no God and that psychoanalysis came to expose religion. But actually he was a member of a Zionist organization throughout his life. I think that we need to study the life of Freud in detail to understand why he has come up with these absurd views.
Professor Badri, one of the techniques that Freud used is dream analysis. Can you say how compatible dream analysis is to the Islamic belief and practice?
Yes. This is a very important question. Freud considers dreams, analysis of dreams, as the royal road to understanding the unconscious. But actually, how does he explain dreams? All dreams are wish fulfillments. When we dream, then our ego is not active. We are unconscious, we are asleep. So here unconsciousness would be, the id would be active. But because the id is driven mainly by sexual aspects, all our dreams are wish fulfillment related to sexual and aggressive issues. But if, according to Freud, the dream comes as symbols, I'm trying only to simplify the issue. They come as symbols because he says, if you dream about your real intentions, your real sex, then you will be disturbed and you will wake up from your sleep. So it comes in a disguised manner. You have not resolved your Oedipal complex, in which you used to sexually love your mother and hate your father. Now, if it comes to you, the dream that you are having a relationship or sexual or whatever with your mother, this will disturb you, you will wake up. So it will come to you in the form of a cow. You will see a cow in your dream, and then you are feeding the cow grass. Actually, the cow is your mother, and giving grass to the cow to eat it is a sexual relationship with the mother. Now this is the royal road. What kind of royal road is this? Now, dreams are symbolic, yes. This is not an invention of Freud. It's since the times of ancient Egypt, we know this. In Surah Yusuf, we know that the king saw lean cows eating fat cows, 7 lean cows, and then Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam explained this in terms the cow is a year. تزرعون 7 سنين دأبا فما حصدتم فذروه في سنبله. You grow for 7 years, you collect the grain for 7 years, and you keep it because you are going to have another 7 years of drought. Now this is obvious. Now the year is when the man in the prison told him that I have seen myself putting a plate on my head and bears are eating from it. He explained it to him in terms of that he's going to be crucified and bears would eat from his own brain. Now this symbolism, the dream as a symbol, is well known. But the issue is, how come whatever we see in our dream is explained in a sexual manner? For example, if you see in your dream a box, or you see something like a cavity, it is something related to the female sexuality. If you see a pencil, if you see anything which is like this form, then it is a symbol of the sexual organ of the male. What is this? If I see a real cow in my real life, and then I see in the dream a cow, how come it becomes my mother? But I have already experienced seeing a cow eating grass, and I come and see it. You know, here is the issue. Dreams, some people, some psychologists who followed Freud would consider that dreams are only wish fulfillment, and every wish fulfillment will come from the unconscious, and when it comes from the unconscious, then it becomes sexual and aggressive. Others refused all this, and they said dreams have no meaning at all. It is only certain parts of the brain, firing of nerves in certain parts of the brain, and in other parts of the brain. So the person, the sleeping person, tries to make sense out of this. For example, if you see in your brain some activity in your brain goes to a friend of yours, then you see your friend in the dream. But at the same time, haphazardly, another neurons will fire, and these are considered the neurons of a dog or something like that that you have seen in your stored in your memory. Then to bring the two together, you will see your friend howling like a dog, shouting how like that. Now this is really silly to say that dreams have no meaning at all. Dreams have meaning. And there are people who see dreams today who come true tomorrow. There are some people who can interpret dreams very beautifully, and it comes actually. So the best understanding of dreams comes from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which the Prophet miraculously said that dreams are of three kinds. Either it comes from evil shaitan, then you can see yourself doing things that are bad. Like one Sahabi, he came to the Prophet and told him, I saw my head in the dream being cut off and rolling, and I was running after my head to bring it back to my body. Then the Prophet said, do not tell people what shaitan is playing with you during your dreams. If you dream you are invited to a party and you put on your best suit and you are going to the party, but then when you are waiting for the bus to take you, you discover that you forgot to put on your trousers, you are naked in the street and you keep running around. This is the playing of shaitan with you. So these are a kind of dream the Prophet spoke about. The other kind of dream, he says, hadith al-nafs. Whatever you speak to yourself, your experiences during the day, what you see, then you see it at night. If you are, for example, having a wish to eat, it's Ramadan and you are thirsty and you sleep, and then you see a dream that you are eating ice cream. This is your not wish fulfillment of any sexual form, but this is an experience. This is hadith. This is what yourself is talking to you. So this is another section of the dreams. The first one comes from shaitan. The second one comes from your experiences of the day, or whatever you say to yourself. And the third type of dream is the prophetic dreams, the dreams that are spiritual, the dreams in which, and the Prophet says, imma hadith al-nafs, or from shaitan, or dreams from Rahman, dreams that comes from the heavens, the dreams that are beautiful, the dreams that give you good tidings, the dreams which will show you some of what is going to happen in future to you. Look at this comprehensive approach of dreams. I don't think there is anything that we cannot say dreams are nonsense, and we cannot say dreams are only wish fulfillments of a sexual nature. Indeed, the Prophet gives us a beautiful understanding of dreams and its symbolism.
Professor Badri, what would you say are the differences between secular psychology, Western psychology, and Islamic psychology?
Yes. Well, secular psychology and Islamic psychology are very different in certain areas and very near to each other in other aspects. Any sort of psychology, Western psychology is not all of it is anti-Islamic, though the conception, the philosophical background is anti-Islamic, but the application is useful. For example, all this area of behavior therapy, it is based on the assumption that man has no nature at all, behaviorism. That man is simply like a dry leaf being blown around by the winds of the environment. This is not Islamic. But when you come to learning, by conditioning, which is the basic building block of behaviorism, This is science, we accept it and we use it. There is no problem with it, and our early Muslim scholars have actually applied it. They have applied systematic desensitization. They spoke about learning by conditioning. They spoke about it in detail. Read Al-Ghazali, read other. When we talk about cognitive psychology again, go and read Ibn Taymiyyah, go and read Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. He spoke about this aspect of cognition, how it develops in detail. That he spoke about the human soul active all the time, what we call the psyche today. It is active during the day and during the night, non-stop. And he says that everything starts with a thought. And if you accept a thought or a volition, if you accept it, then it becomes a motivation. He says, if you accept the motive, then you will do it in real life. If you repeat it, it becomes a habit. So he says, when you have the thought, try to fight it if it is a bad thought. If you don't fight it, it will become a motivation. If you do not fight the motive, then the motive will be actually, you will find yourself unable to stop yourself from doing it in real life. If you do it once, then make istighfar and fight it. But if you don't and it repeat, then it becomes a habit, and it is not easy to change. I think that here we will find that people who speak about cognitive psychology today, and they speak about that the emotions follow our thoughts, and that people to help people, you change their thought, and after changing their thinking, then emotions will change. This is already mentioned by Ibn Qayyim in very nice manner. But he gave it, and of course, because he's a Muslim scholar, he gave it an Islamic dimension, and that is, I think, where our students should actually know what our early Muslim scholars said. So here, psychology, when you come to the area where psychology merges with other exact sciences, like, for example, physiological psychology, marriage between psychology and physiology, when it comes to psychopharmacy, when it comes to genetic psychology, behavior genetics, we are facing scientific aspects of psychology. We make use of it. It is Islamic. Whatever is actually useful to man and has no connotation, secular connotation, it is Islamic. We have no problem with it. So here the issue is, when we speak about changing psychology, we are actually trying to adapt it, to see the things that are opposed to culture, and those opposed to culture, to our culture and our Islam, are generally the ones that have no scientific background. But when we come to study perception, to study learning, we have no problem. So actually, secular psychology and Islamic psychology are not two different poles, but it is a process whereby we are trying to adapt and to Islamize those aspects that have become secular, but they are useful. When we make them, for example, when we change cognitive psychology, we see it in terms of our Islamic conception, and the patient comes to us and he says, I'm bad, Allah does not like me because I did something wrong, and he's depressed. Then when we change his thought about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his forgiveness and his love to to the humans he created, we are actually changing his thought. Not only changing his thought, but also changing his spirituality. So indeed, we are using the methods that have been developed in the West, but we are using it in an Islamic fashion. And when we do so, we will discover that our early Muslim scholars have already gone through the same route.